Hi, how's everyone doing out there? We are on day 6 of this book in our Family Read Aloud series. We are reading Here in the Real World by Sarah Pennypacker, published by Balzer and Gray, which is part of HarperCollins. And we're going to see what happens next. We're going to find out more about Ware and Jolene and the abandoned church lot that's about to go up for auction. And yeah, I hope everyone had a good weekend, and we're gonna get started. And when we left off, Ware had just pledged to Jolene that he was gonna save her garden. He's just not sure how he's gonna do that. Okay, we are picking up with chapter 30 here. Friday was different at home too. You moved her into the rehab place? Ware asked his mother when he found her in the kitchen. Is she okay? More than okay, she answered. The doctors say she's healing well, and she's like her old self already. We hadn't been in the room an hour before she was telling the staff how to schedule her roommate's kidney dialysis. Who else but Big Deal, huh? The knot of worry Ware had been carrying loosened a little. Actually, I can think of one other person. Fair enough. I guess I did inherit that gene, she admitted with a laugh. Now let me make you something to eat. I've missed you. She opened the fridge and frowned. Not a fruit or vegetable in sight. And with those words, Ware saw a complete side flank strategy open up in the Greek market battle, simple and Jolene proof. I'll get some, he offered casually. There's a place near the wreck. His mother dug a couple of 20s from her wallet. No junk. Ware scrubbed his hands and sat and watched as she shook some crackers onto a plate and sliced some cheddar. Where's this rehab place? He asked when she joined him at the table. Can I go see her? May, not can. It's downtown. You could take the bus after rec, I suppose. I can't take you. I have 0 free time. I'll stop in on my way home from work sometimes, but she dropped her head to her hands. There's so much to figure out. Insurance, what to do about her furniture if she needs to move, the whole mess. Ware put down his cracker. If something had happened to Big Deal, something about her condition, something he hadn't defended her from, that caused her to fall, then the whole mess was his fault. Well, it's nothing for you to worry about. Your Uncle Si and I will figure it out. He swallowed hard. No, Mom, you have to tell me about stuff like that. They both startled at a soft thud of distant thunder. Ware glanced out the window. The sky looked bumpy and yellow like the cantaloupes Jolene had tossed on her compost pile yesterday. Thunderstorm coming right on schedule. I'm not kidding, Mom. You and Dad have to tell me things. I'm not some little kid anymore. Hey, watch it. You're not some little kid. You're my little kid, the only one I've got. Ware didn't answer. His mother said that a lot. Always before it made him feel treasured, but today it felt as if she'd wrapped a blanket over his face. She reached over and ran a thumb around his forehead at the hairline. You're filthy. What have you been doing? So, we're gardening. We? Who's we? She asked, brightening in such a hopeful way that Ware's heart fell. Mom, don't worry about me. Well, I do, because she picked her napkin from her lap and folded it into a neat triangle. When I was young, I was, I know, class president, a million friends, and Dad played 3 sports. I know. I just want you to be happy. He thought about telling her that sometimes he was happy spending time alone, but no matter how many times he tried, she would never understand. He learned this the evening before his 8th birthday, when she had come barging into his room. Didn't you hear me calling you? She'd asked, eyes panicked. Ware scrambled to his feet, confused. He'd done something wrong, but what? Sorry, I was. His mother charged around the room, snapping on his 2 lamps, the overhead light, erasing the dramatic shadows the low winter rays were casting on his ceiling. Lying on the floor all alone in the dark? Why didn't you hear me? Do you know how worried I was? What were you doing? Her questions were coming too fast, or maybe his brain had slowed. I was thinking about 8s. What? Looking, he corrected himself, looking at how 8s are really circles on circles. He hoped he'd gotten the right answer, the one that would ease the anxiety in his mother's face. He hadn't. Looking isn't doing, Ware. What were you doing? I was doing in my mind. He pointed to the ceiling, tried to show her how the swirls of plaster made an infinity of vertical infinity signs. See? Oh, Ware, she said, sinking out onto the bed with her head in her hands. I just want you to be happy. Which had only confused him more. Lying on the floor, he'd actually been aware of the physical presence of happiness. It felt as if he'd swallowed a glowing seed. But his mother's face was so very sad. I'll try, Mom, he'd promised, meaning it. I'll try more. 3.5 years later, apparently, he still hadn't tried enough. Do you think people can ever get a redo? He asked. If something's wrong with them, can they start over like brand new? Oh, no, I'm afraid not. Your grandmother's prognosis is very good, but she won't be like new. Ware suddenly felt alone, not the peaceful kind of alone, the lonely kind. He got up and brought his plate to the sink. His mother rose too. She went to the calendar. 6 more weeks until we own this house, she said. They both jumped at a crack of thunder close by. Ware went to the window. Black clouds were tumbling in. His mother joined him. It's going to be fine, she said, head pressed to the glass, spattered with sudden rain. Ware couldn't tell if she was talking to herself or to him. It's going to be fine, she said again, as if whoever it was needed extra reassurance. Ware thought about the new notice, his impossible vow, his grandmother falling on his watch. It's going to be okay. He wasn't so sure. Chapter 31. The next day, Ware lay on his side watching Jolene swing the sledgehammer in a storm of concrete dust. He had stuck close to her all morning, afraid she was going to abandon the lot again. But she had worked hard hoeing a new trench, and Ware understood that the hoeing was a message. She decided to trust him. This felt like a miracle, and the miracle made him feel both relieved and anxious at the same time. Don't you think this lot should feel different? He asked. He'd been wondering again about what made water holy, which was a thing he kept secret from Jolene, of course. They might not be enemies, but his plan to get reborn still felt too feathery and brave to risk sharing. When the question had expanded. I mean, it was a church. Don't you think it should still feel different here? I told you, Jolene slammed the hammer down. They took all the holy with them. But what does holy even feel like? Do you think we'd notice if it came back? Above, the queen palms rustled a warning. Ware sat up. He heard the tight hiss of a bike braking and the clang of it tossed against the construction fencing. He and Jolene watched Ashley drop down over the fencing and shake herself into composure. Her cool evaporated when she saw the operation in the parking lot. She hurried over. You can leave, Jolene said, leaning in threateningly. Her safety glasses made her look like a giant bug surveying a meal. We're covering the pavement with water. No more danger for those birds, so bye. Ashley looked skeptical. Jolene dropped the hammer and yanked off the goggles. Ware stepped between them. It's true, we're building a wall around the foundation. We're making a moat. A moat? Like around a castle? That's, ridiculous. Ware turned away, face burning. Moats weren't ridiculous. Most people thought they only protected castles from ground-level approaches, but tunneling ambushes were much more dangerous, and a moat made those impossible. You want to be a knight in shining armor, big hero, chivalry, and all that stuff? Ashley went on. Ware had to step away at that. Knights were brave, they were loyal, they administered justice, he recited to himself, stomping up the back steps. On top of that, they practically invented leading purpose-driven lives. From age 7, their purpose was to train for knighthood. After they were knighted, it was to serve their liege lords. The problem, he had to admit when he climbed up to the top of the tower, was the chivalry part. Ware remembered the evening he'd handed his mother his report. What a crock, she'd sputtered. Ware, sitting on the floor beside her chair as she read, had been crestfallen. Mrs. Sprague didn't think it was a crock. I got an A. Oh, not your report. Your report is very good, but here, she pointed to page 11, this business of protecting fair damsels? If the men hadn't deprived the women of their rights in the first place, they wouldn't need to go showing off about how chivalrous they were. What a crock! Her words had left him dismayed for days. If the knight's code no longer applied in today's world, that meant that he himself would never have a chance to exemplify its standards. To live a life of honor, of service to a liege lord. Most importantly, to come to the rescue of those in need. Ware had stockpiled numerous imaginary scenarios for coming to the rescue of those in need. Due to his temporary lack of muscles, he populated them with people from the extreme ends of the age range. Babies crawling into oncoming tidal waves, old people too weak to finish crossing the street. In each he'd swoop in, chin up, chest out, advancing boldly, to pluck them from disaster's brink. When he'd thought about it more rationally, he'd realized that it was only that one part about damsels that didn't apply. Nowadays, girls didn't need special treatment as if they were weaker. In fact, nowadays they'd be knights too. All the rest of the code was still okay. No, the real disappointment was that he never would be a knight. He hadn't even protected his own grandmother when she needed it. He'd promised to save a papaya garden from a bank, but didn't have a clue how. Now, everywhere he looked, he saw the ridiculousness of his dreams reflected back at him. Even the queen palms seemed to be working hard to hold down a laugh. Him? Hero material? What a crock! Jolene's voice floated up. You don't tell one single person about this place, not one single word. And then it struck him. He flew down the stairs, ran back to the girls. That's the whole deal? Ashley was asking. All you have to do is not tell anyone and you'll actually cover all of this pavement with water? Yep, said Jolene. Nope, said Ware. Both girls spun to him. You're going to do one more thing. Oh, what's that? Ashley said. Get your father to order the bank not to auction this place. Please, I don't think so. Ware grabbed his thigh and grimaced. Oh, those broken crane legs! Ashley crossed her arms. Fine. You actually make a moat here and I'll talk to my father. She walked off, ponytail swinging. Jolene's eyebrows took a hike above her sunglasses, and in their mirrors Ware saw himself again. A kid who was not quite so pathetic after all. Chapter 32. Ware had never seen the Greek market before, because it faced 2nd Street, and his mother had determined that 1st Street was the most efficient route downtown. And once she determined the most efficient route anywhere, she never wavered. When Ware grew up, he'd take a different route every time he went somewhere. Anyway, there it was right next door behind the east wooden fence. A sign over the awning announced Greek Market in gold letters in case he'd missed it, but he wouldn't have. For a moment, he could only stand outside on the sidewalk and stare. As Ware headed into kindergarten, his parents had staggered him with a super deluxe box of 128 crayons. All those colors displaying themselves in a rainbow of promise, all for him. He felt the same joy of abundance now. Fruits and vegetables burst out of their bins, so bright they seemed to be lit from within. You see that? Wow, he would have said, except as always, who could he show? Ware had left only 10 minutes after Jolene, but she was nowhere in sight. Probably she was grabbing stuff from the dumpster. The question was, what did she do after that? She was never back by the time Ware left, so where did she spend the afternoons dragging a bag of garbage? Ware shook his head. He had an actual job to do here in the forbidden Greek market and stepped inside. He picked up a basket and tossed in a package of blueberries and a head of lettuce, then carrots, tomatoes, bananas, and plums, then headed for the register. Hot one out there, he said to the checkout lady. Ware appreciated that for 6 months of the year, that was the greeting everyone gave whenever they went anywhere in Florida. It made things easier not to have to come up with an original opening line. Hot one out there, yes indeed, the lady agreed. Ware placed his basket on the counter. Beside him, a crate of what looked like lumpy footballs, mottled green and orange, caught his attention. He reached out to touch one, felt the leathery skin. The sign on the bin had fallen over. Curious, he flipped it up. Papayas, $1.99 a pound. Papayas? Ware lifted one, felt its surprising weight. I know some papaya plants, he told the checkout lady, although he hadn't planned to add anything after the hot one out there opening. They're pretty spindly. That so? The checkout lady said. Ware looked down doubtfully at the heavy fruit in his hands. I don't know how they'll hold 50 of these. Things generally grow into what's needed of them, she said. That's what they do. You really think so? That has been my experience, yes, indeed. She took the papaya from him. As she leaned to the scale to weigh it, Ware glimpsed an open door behind her. Outside was a garden. A woman with white-streaked hair piled on her head stood beside a table under an arbor of vines. She wore a flowered blouse and baggy trousers belted with twine. A girl with stringy yellow hair falling over faded overalls perched at the table. Ware watched Jolene drink from a glass of purple juice and dig into a plate heaped with food. The checkout lady straightened, blocking his view. Ware leaned to see around her. That'll be $23.20, the checkout lady said, thumping his purchases into a paper bag. Ware craned his neck. The woman in the garden, Mrs. Stavros it had to be, was pointing to the grapes above her head, and Jolene was nodding. $23.20, the cashier repeated, one hand out, the other on her hip, teapot style. Ware rose on his toes, the closest he had to a watchtower. Mrs. Stavros dished more food onto Jolene's plate with a hand on her shoulder, and Jolene threw her head back, and out came a sound Ware had never heard before. It was a nice sound, gurgly and soft, like water bubbling out of a fountain. A real surprise coming from someone with such sharp elbows and knees. Someone with arrow-slit eyes. If he'd been in an actual watchtower, he might have toppled out. He hadn't known Jolene could laugh. Chapter 33. When Ware lowered himself from the oak limb that afternoon and saw the man at the bus stop, he nearly dropped the groceries. It was the man's hair, dark brown like his mother's, rippled and close cut like his own. He took a quick step behind the tree, but the man turned. Ware, he called, lifting his hand. There you are. Ware walked over on legs that suddenly didn't feel quite solid. Uncle Si, what are you doing here? Uncle Si wagged a finger. Wrong question, little man, he said with the kind of laugh that meant things weren't funny at all. The right question is, what are you doing not in there? He nodded to the community center. Ware opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I'll start. Uncle Si patted the bench and Ware sank down. Your mom asked me to pick you up. Imagine my surprise when I went inside and couldn't find my nephew. Ware could imagine all right. He dropped his head to his hands. Did you ask? I did. Some teenager. He pointed me to the sign-in sheet. No nephew today, no nephew all week. Ware groaned. He peeked between his fingers. You reported me missing or something? No, I almost called your mother, but then I remembered she said you took the 3:45 bus home each day. I thought, she drops you off, you don't go in, but you take the bus home. So I decided to wait here. Ware raised his head. I can't stand it, Uncle Si. It's awful. Well, I saw that. When I was your age, I would have ditched that place too. But hiding behind a tree all day long? That's not good, little man. I don't do that. I saw you, Ware. You came out from behind that big oak. Uncle Si's voice was gentle but sad. Ware stood up, hoisted the bag. Come with me, he said. I'll show you where I go. Chapter 34. Uncle Si pulled a beer from the fridge and hopped onto the counter. He moved like a cat, lanky and cool. Ware put the groceries away and poured himself some orange juice. Are you going to tell them? He stole a sideways glance at his uncle. Uncle Si rested his head on the cupboard. What do you think? No, maybe, but please don't. Ware lifted himself onto the counter beside his uncle. He cupped his glass with both hands, hiding the silly seahorses that pranced around the rim. My mom thinks I need more, he lifted air quote fingers from the cup, meaningful social interaction. Uncle Si sighed. It's what she does, my little sister, fixes things, even things that don't need fixing. You don't seem like you need fixing to me. The unexpected kindness of the words undid Ware. He didn't seem like he needed fixing. He felt himself on the verge of tears. Unless she's right, maybe there's something wrong with me. Uncle Si put down his beer. He took off his glasses and polished them on the belly of his shirt, then put them back on and looked at Ware expectantly. And Ware surprised himself. He told his uncle all of it. How he felt different from other kids, kids who tumbled through life in packs, who jumped into the middle of whatever was going on. How he liked to watch from the edges for a while, do reconnaissance from the watchtower, and how he could spend hours by himself, making things or just thinking, and not be bored. And then he told his uncle the worst. She wishes she had a normal kid. Uncle Si frowned, a tiny frown. That's hard to believe. She talks about you all the time. It's true. She called me antisocial, like I have a disease. He held his breath. Uncle Si steepled his long fingers to his lips. Well, if that's a disease, I've had it all my life. Ware swelled with so much hope he couldn't reply. Yeah, Uncle Si nodded. Just then it sounded like you were describing me. Actually, it sounded like you were describing everyone I work with. The musicians, cinematographers, the writers. The whole tribe sounded like you were describing an artist. And just as abruptly, Ware's hope was dashed. He looked at the floor. I can't draw. Uncle Si shrugged. Lots of kinds of artists, you know. He crossed his arms behind his head. When you were just a rug rat, I came to see Big Deal. Your family was there, too. We were moving her into the Sunset Palms place. I took you out one day, get you out of your parents' hair, took you to the ocean. First time you'd seen it, you went rigid as if you'd been electrified. Eyes like this, and you kept reaching for the water, wanting to drink it. Ware felt a shock of recognition at the story, the way he felt whenever he passed a mirror unexpectedly. But of course, wanting to drink the ocean would sound crazy, especially to people like Uncle Si, who went to film festivals with celebrities, who was practically a celebrity himself and who sent postcards from places like Morocco, Hong Kong, and Calcutta, places you had to look up on a map. I was a weird little kid, huh? Weird? No. That's when I thought maybe you'd be an artist. Ware gripped the counter. What do you mean? First time I knew it about myself, I was a kid too. Maybe 8 or 9. A friend of mine had a new kitten. Its paw pads were so perfect, like shiny little coffee beans. I had the urge to swallow them. That's when I knew. Not that I was an artist, I hadn't figured that out yet, just that I was different, and this difference would be important my whole life. I don't understand. It's like this. Artists see something that moves us. We need to take it in, make it part of ourselves, and then give it back to the world, translated in a way the world can see it too. That makes sense? You see that? Wow. Yes. Artists need solitude to do that, and quiet. By the way, you'll have to fight for that. The world loves noise. Ware fell back against the cupboard. He hadn't realized how tightly he'd been holding himself since he'd uttered the word antisocial out loud. I get it. I know you do. You showed me today. I did? Your lot, the moat, the sundial, that stained glass window. You're transforming it. That's what artists do. Ware remembered his drawing of the escaping tiger. Not everyone can be an artist. But that's not me. I told you I can't draw or write or make music or anything. The lot is your art right now. You're creating it. A slow smile spread over his face. I have a hunch. Tell you what, I'm going to give you a movie camera. Nothing fancy, just the one I travel with. I'll show you how to use it, teach you how to do some easy editing. You bring that camera with you to the lot and film what you're doing there? I'll be back in a month, and you show me. So, you won't tell my parents? Sorry, little man, I think I have to. Or you do. No, if they knew, my dad would worry. My job this summer is to not worry them. And besides, Mom would send me back to rec, and then Jolene would be alone with everything. I've made a promise to her. Please. Uncle Si rubbed his forehead, eyes squeezed shut. Then he slid off the counter. All right. The community center is next door. Go there if anything happens or if you even think something's not right. You stay safe. Just then the door opened and Ware's mother walked in. Evening, you two. Having a nice chat? Evening, little deal. Uncle Si hugged his sister. We are, in fact. Ware's mom poured some iced tea and sat at the table. Uncle Si raised his beer like a toast. Got some good news for you tonight, little deal. He winked at Ware. Oh, what's that? Turns out you're raising an artist. She lifted her eyebrows toward Ware. That so? That's so. Know what that makes you? She shook her head, sipped some tea. What's that make me, Uncle Si? Or what's that make me, Cyrus? Uncle Si beamed. Lucky. That night, Ware cut up the papaya and passed it around for dessert. It's good, right? He asked after everyone had had some. Really sweet. It is, his uncle agreed. Extremely sweet. Plus smooth. It's a very smooth fruit, don't you think? Don't you think? Yes, Ware, it's remarkably smooth, his mother said, giving him a funny look. Tastes kind of like a cantaloupe, but more cantaloupe-y, right? His father cocked his head. Did you grow this yourself? Are you a papaya farmer now or something? Ware dipped his face, but he smiled to himself. He was a papaya farmer now, or something. So we're going to leave off for today. Pick up with chapter 35 tomorrow. Take care. Bye.